think the real reason, and vouch for me on this, Coke guy, I think the real reason women love Coke is they could come over to your house, snort all your blow, and your dick will be broke. So you can't fuck them. And they could just stay up and talk all night like they always wanted to do.
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, January the 9th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, meditation, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
7 o'clock. Varney and Company picks it up. Stu, take it away.
Morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Where do you start on a day like this? Drama in Venezuela, maybe a tariff decision at the Supreme Court, oil guys in the White House. Yeah, it's all happening. But look at this. In December, just 50,000 jobs were added to the economy, and the unemployment rate came in at 4.4%. Now, that's down slightly from the previous reading. That is considered a softer reading on the job market, and it looks like stocks like it. Look at this. The Dow Industrials up about 140 points at this point. This is pre-market. The S&P's up 24 and the Nasdaq's up over 100 points too. That job report is being looked at by the Federal Reserve. They are figuring out the future of interest rates. As of now, after that jobs report, we have the 10-year coming in with a yield of 4.17%, no, it just moved up to 4.18. The 2-year, just above the 3.5% level. You're now at 3.51. Bitcoin, 90,500 was the latest quote I had. Now it's 90,400. Watch out for the Supreme Court's decision on tariffs. Could be coming around 10 o'clock Eastern this morning. It could move the market. On the show today, the authorities in Venezuela seem to be bending to President Trump's will. The new leaders in Caracas have started to release political prisoners. That is a concession. In return, the president says more U.S. attacks on Venezuela, quote, will not be needed. The price of oil pegged at around, $58 a barrel this morning. The president meets oil company executives just a few hours from now. He says $100 billion is needed to revitalize the Venezuelan oil industry. We've got a new development in Iran, protests spreading all across the country, and the mullahs have cut off internet service across the entire nation. Khomeini says he will not bow down to Trump or the protesters. No internet. Separately, the president tells the New York Times that his global power is limited only by his own morality. And we're covering California Governor Newsom's State of the State address. He's in a tough spot because the formerly Golden State is riddled with problems. Without much of a policy for the future, he fell back on Trump bashing. He's not normal, he says. It's Friday, January the 9th, 2026. Varney and Company
Is about to begin, right. So, again, he misrepresents or misreports almost everything, especially the stock market. He says, well, the stocks like this, the stocks don't like that. They're not sentient life forms. Okay, what he means to say is the people that run the big banks, Jamie Dimon, like this and don't like that. Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little meditation.
Welcome, beautiful souls. Your morning is not just the start of another day. It is the spark that sets the rhythm for every experience that will follow. When the start of your day is strong, grounded and clear, challenges don't feel heavy. They feel like opportunities. This moment is where you set the tone. And today, you are choosing strength. Let's begin. Picture your life as a vast canvas. Each stroke filled with different experiences. Colors of joy. Threads of challenges. And layers you never expected. Some shades glow with laughter. Others are marked with trials that deepened your wisdom. Yet together, they create the most beautiful picture right here in this moment. Feel gratitude for not just the bright shades, but also the darker tones, because they gave your picture the depth, courage, and meaning. Let yourself feel a deep appreciation. Every experience has carried me here. And here, I stand stronger. Now imagine looking at the day ahead as if it were fresh, blank pages waiting to be written. You hold the pen. You decide the tone, the energy, the story. Abundance doesn't come from having every step mapped out for you. It comes from knowing you have the strength to shape what comes next. Notice how the positive energy settles into your body, like a golden opening in your chest, like a steady strength in your shoulders, like a quiet spark waiting to move you forward. Let a quiet confidence rise within you. I can handle whatever today brings. I am more capable than I think. Now turn inward to the strength already alive inside you. Feel it in your body. The weight of your bones holding you upright. The steady rhythm of your heartbeat. The life coursing through every cell. This is grit, the quiet fire that refuses to give up. resilience that has carried you through every challenge so far. Sense it like a flame in your chest, steady and unshakable. Remind yourself of the truth. I have faced storms before, and I stand ready for today. Now, gently bring your awareness to your senses. Notice the sounds around you, each one a reminder that life is moving, alive, and unfolding. Notice how the air feels against your skin, cool or warm. Imagine colors, shapes, or light around you growing sharper, more vibrant. See the light, real or imagined, stretching into the day. Every detail around you is here to be noticed. To sharpen your focus, to remind you that you are present, aware, and ready. Invite your senses to awaken fully, like flowers opening to the sun. Now, see yourself stepping into the flow of your day. Picture yourself moving with calm confidence. Handling challenges with clarity and ease. Having energy like a flame and grit like solid ground beneath your feet. See your smile changing someone's morning. Your words carrying kindness, your choices creating impact. You walk through your day strong, energized, and open to every opportunity. Silently affirm, I choose strength. I choose joy. I choose success. Hold everything you've gathered here. Gratitude for your life. Confidence in your strength. Grit to keep moving. Let it rest inside you like a steady flame. Because you started here, because you began with intention, there is nothing you cannot do. Step forward now, steady, strong, and ready for anything.
And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you now, Steve Inman.
Well, once again, Discount LL Cool J is pissed off that they ran out of boner pills, and the store owner's like, what do you want me to do about it, huh? How about you go ask your mama? And he goes, what'd you say about my mama? And of course, LL Cool J got to live up to the hype of his hit song, but ends up getting hit in the snot locker. And what a beautiful follow-through executed by the store owner here tonight as Discount LL Cool J laid out like a chalked-out victim in a crime scene. Starts out with Discount LL Cool J displeased with the fact that they ran out of boner pills. The store owner's like, what do you want me to do about it, huh? If you want something, go down to the street and go get yourself a prostitute. I'm not that guy. It's too bad you didn't get the memo that your mom sent me to knock your ass out and could come in here asking for boner pills. Discount LL Cool J damages his flux capacitor, now traveling back in time, listening to his greatest hits.
And that was Steve Inman. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Cold War.
June 8th, 1967. The Sinai Peninsula. The heat is not the only thing distorting the horizon. Across the shifting sands of the Mittler Pass, the air shimmers with the catastrophic aftermath of a slaughter. To the naked eye, it looks like a scrapyard of twisted metal stretching for miles. Black plumes of smoke rising like funeral pyres into the cloudless blue sky. But to the Soviet military attachés arriving on the scene in their light utility vehicles, this is not just a battlefield defeat. It is a technological impossibility. They step out of their vehicles, boots crunching on sand stained with oil and hydraulic fluid. These men are not infantry. They are technical advisors, engineers, and intelligence officers sent from Moscow to observe the triumph of Soviet armor. They expected to see a parade of victory. Instead, they are walking through a graveyard of their own best engineering. Lying in the sand, turret blown clean off its chassis, sits a T-54 tank. A few meters away, a T-55 tank smokes quietly, its hull perforated by a clean, decisive entry hole. These machines were the pride of the Warsaw Pact. They were low-slung, heavily armored beasts, designed to withstand the apocalypse of a nuclear battlefield in Europe. They were armed with the fearsome 100mm D-10 tank gun, a weapon capable of cracking NATO armor like an eggshell. On paper, they were the apex predators of the mid-20th century. And yet, here they are, dead. The Soviet advisor runs a gloved hand over the impact mark on the T-55 tank. He measures the diameter. It is small, too small. This was not the work of a heavy artillery shell or an airstrike. This was a kinetic penetrator from an enemy tank. He looks across the valley, trying to reconstruct the engagement. Based on the tracks in the sand, the enemy was firing from ridgelines, exposing themselves against the sky. It was a tactical suicide move. The Soviet manuals were clear. The T-54 tanks, with their superior ballistic profile, should have been impossible to hit at these ranges, while the enemy exposed their tall, clumsy silhouettes. The enemy in question was the American-made M48 pattern. To the Soviets, the pattern was a dinosaur. It was a tall, gas-guzzling, oscillating giant with a high profile that made it theoretically the easiest target in the world. In the 1960s, Soviet intelligence briefings often mocked the pattern. It was considered a relic of World War II thinking, bloated and soft compared to the angular, aggressive perfection of the Soviet T-series. The pattern carried a 90mm gun, a weapon the Kremlin considered obsolete, against the sloped frontal armor of a T-54 tank. The math simply did not add up. A 90mm shell should have bounced off the glacis plate of these Soviet machines. The pattern should have been spotted first, shot first, and destroyed first. But the reality burning in front of the advisors told a different, terrifying story. Hundreds of Egyptian T-54 and T-55 tanks lay destroyed. The American-made patterns, crewed by the Israeli Defense Forces, had not just won, they had dominated. The advisor turns to his aide, his face pale. If the M48 pattern could do this to the T-54 tank here, in the desert, what would happen if the Red Army tried to push through the Fulda Gap in Germany? The strategic balance of the Cold War rested on the assumption that Soviet armor was superior. In one afternoon, that assumption had been turned into scrap metal. This mystery, how a mediocre American tank annihilated the superior Soviet flagship, is the story of the greatest deception in armored warfare history. It is a story of hidden variables, human factors, and engineering secrets that the Kremlin never saw coming. Subscribe to Cold War Impact. We analyze the hidden history of the conflicts that shaped our world. Click the bell to stay briefed. Back in Moscow, the teletype machines began to chatter with frantic urgency. The initial reports from Cairo were dismissed as hysteria or propaganda. Impossible, a general in the main intelligence directorate might have muttered, reading the casualty ratios. The Egyptians had lost hundreds of tanks. The Israelis had lost a fraction of that number. The Kremlin needed answers, and they needed them immediately. A special commission was quietly assembled. Their mandate was simple. Find out what happened to the T-54 tanks. Was it a secret American ammunition? Had the US secretly deployed a new unknown tank disguised as the old Patton? Or worse, was the T-54 tank the backbone of the entire Eastern Bloc's defense strategy fundamentally flawed? The panic was justified. The Soviet Union had exported the T-54 and T-55 tanks to every corner of the globe. From Vietnam to Cuba, from Syria to North Korea, this tank was the symbol of communist military power. If it was vulnerable, the Soviet sphere of influence was defenseless. The investigation began with a forensic analysis of the battle logs. The advisors noted something strange about the engagement distances. The M48 Patton tanks were hitting targets at ranges that shouldn't have been possible for their optical systems. They were firing faster than the manual said a human loader could move, and they were moving through terrain that should have bogged down their heavy gasoline engine chassis. It was as if the American machine was defying the laws of physics. One specific report caught the eye of a senior analyst. It described a skirmish near the Rafah Junction. A platoon of M48 Patton tanks had engaged a superior force of T-55 tanks. The Soviet tanks had the ambush position. They had the first shot. By all rights, the Pattons should have been wiped out in the first 30 seconds. Instead, the M48S pivoted. They returned fire with a speed that blurred the line between mechanical capability and impossibility. Within 3 minutes, the Soviet tanks were burning. The Pattons moved on, seemingly invincible. The analyst circled the report in red ink. Speed, he wrote in the margin. Not speed of movement, speed of violence. They didn't know it yet, but they were staring at a discrepancy that went deeper than steel thickness or gun caliber. The Soviets were looking for a technological explanation, a magic bullet or a super engine. They were looking at the hard numbers. But the M48 Patton possessed a different kind of quality, a hidden attribute that couldn't be measured in millimeters of armor or top speed on a paved road. As the sun set over the smoking Sinai, the mystery deepened. The advisors arranged for parts of the destroyed T-54 tanks to be shipped back to the USSR for analysis. They also put out a high-priority order to their operatives in the field. Capture an M48 Patton. They needed to tear it apart. They needed to see inside the belly of the beast. They had to understand how this tall, awkward American giant had become the executioner of the Soviet armored dream. The Cold War was about to shift gears. The narrative of Soviet armored supremacy had been punctured, and the race was on to plug the hole before the West realized just how vulnerable the Red Army really was. Moscow, the main directorate of the General Staff. To understand the panic gripping the Soviet advisors, you have to look at the world through their eyes. In the austere, smoke-filled briefing rooms of Moscow, war was a math problem. It was a calculation of variables: armor thickness, muzzle velocity, effective range, and silhouette size. By every metric of this military calculus, the T-54 tank and the upgraded T-55 tank were the perfect solutions. They were designed based on the brutal lessons of the Eastern Front. The Soviet engineers knew that being seen meant being killed. So they built the T-54 tank low to the ground. It stood just 2.4 meters high, a squat, terrifying roach of a machine that could hide in the folds of the terrain. Its turret was a rounded hemisphere, a shape designed to deflect incoming shells like rain off a curved roof. Inside this steel shell sat the D-10 tons gun. It was a rifled 100mm cannon derived from naval artillery. In 1960, it was a sledgehammer. It fired an armor-piercing, high-explosive shell that could tear through nearly 200 millimeters of steel at 1,000 meters. Against this masterpiece of Soviet minimalism, the American M48 Patton looked like a joke. The The Soviet intelligence files on the M48 were thick with disdain. The pattern was massive. It stood over 3 meters tall, a towering silhouette that the Soviet tankers derisively called the Cathedral. You didn't need to hunt for an M48. You just had to look up. It was fueled by gasoline, not diesel, making it a rolling fire hazard that earned it the nickname the Ronson after the cigarette lighter because it lights up the first time, every time. On paper, the engagement should have gone like this. The low-profile T-54 tank spots the towering M48 pattern first. The T-54 fires its superior 100mm cannon. The shell penetrates the pattern's vertical armor. The pattern explodes. Game over. But the reports flooding in from the Middle East were describing the exact opposite. The intelligence officers read accounts of M48 crews spotting the Soviet tanks first. They read about M48S firing first. And most disturbingly, they read about the impossible accuracy. In a tank duel, the first round is everything. If you miss your first shot, you are likely dead before you can load the second. The Soviet manual stated that at ranges over 1,000 meters, the probability of a first-round hit was roughly 50%. It was a coin toss. Yet, the M48 patterns were achieving first-round hits at ranges of 1,500, even 2,000 meters. They were sniping T-54 tanks from across valleys before the Soviet crews could even calculate the elevation. How? The investigation turned to the captured equipment. In a secret testing facility near Kubinka, Soviet engineers crawled over a captured M48A, two like ants on a carcass. They measured the armor. It was cast steel, decent but nothing revolutionary. They examined the engine. It was a complex, thirsty AV-1790, prone to overheating if mistreated. They looked at the 90mm M41 gun. It was a good gun, but ballistically inferior to their own D-10. Then they climbed inside. The interior of a T-54 tank is a dark, cramped nightmare. It is designed for fighting, not living. The loader has to contort his body to ram shells into the breach. The commander is squeezed against the gunner. The ergonomic philosophy of the Soviet Union was simple. The machine matters, the man is replaceable. But inside the M48 pattern, the Soviet engineers found something unsettling. Space. The turret basket was wide. The loader had room to stand, to pivot, to work. The commander had a clear, unobstructed view through a bizarre optical device that protruded from the turret roof. The controls were intuitive. The pedals and handles fell naturally to the hand. One engineer, wiping grease from his hands, noted a peculiar device linked to the gunner's optics. It wasn't a simple telescopic sight like the ones used on the T-55 tanks. It was a stereoscopic rangefinder, the M17B1C. It looked like a pair of submarine periscopes laid sideways across the turret. To the Soviets, this was over-engineering. It was delicate, expensive, and required complex calibration. Why would the Americans put such a fragile instrument on a rugged battlefield machine? A simple stadiometric reticle lines in the scope to estimate distance was soldier-proof. This American device was a watchmaker's toy. But as they continued their analysis, a chilling realization began to form. They took the captured M48 onto the firing range. They put a Soviet test crew inside men used to the brutal simplicity of the T-series. They tried to use the American rangefinder. It was confusing at first. It required the commander to look through the lenses and turn a knob until two images merged into one like focusing a camera. It took time. It felt slow. The Soviet test crew reported that it was cumbersome, and yet the combat data didn't lie. The Israelis were not finding it cumbersome. They were using this toy to execute the T-54 tanks with surgical precision. There was a missing variable. The Soviets were analyzing the hardware, but they were missing the software, not computer code, but the process. They were looking at the gun, but ignoring the system that aimed it. They were looking at the tank, but ignoring the crew. The mystery deepened when they analyzed the rate of fire. A T-54 loader, battling the cramped confines of his turret, could sustain perhaps 4 rounds per minute. In the heat of battle, with smoke filling the cabin and adrenaline shaking his hands, that dropped to 3. The M48 pattern crews were reportedly sustaining 7, sometimes 8 rounds per minute. They were putting twice as much lead down range. The Soviet advisors in Cairo sent a coded message back to Moscow. It contained a single, troubling observation from an interrogation of a captured tank crewman. The prisoner had said something about the coincidence, The translator had struggled with the word. Was it luck? Fate? No. It was optics. The Soviets were beginning to suspect that the Americans had fundamentally changed the relationship between the gunner and the commander. In a T-54 tank, the commander found the target, and the gunner aimed the gun. It was a two-step process, with a lag time. In the M48, something else was happening. The Cathedral was not just a tank. It was a hunter-killer platform, where the sensors were doing something the Soviet engineers hadn't accounted for. But the biggest shock was yet to come. The engineers at Kubinka were about to discover a feature of the M48's turret rotation mechanism that defied their understanding of hydraulic power. And when they finally understood it, they would realize that for 20 years they had been building tanks for a war that no longer existed. The tech gap wasn't just wide, it was invisible. The Kubinka Proving Grounds, winter 1968. The snow is deep, muffling the roar of engines, but the tension in the observation bunker is loud enough to hear. The Soviet Commission has moved from static analysis to live-fire replication. They have set up a duel. On one end of the firing range sits their champion, a factory, fresh T-55 tank, the upgraded successor to the T-54. It has the new stabilizer, allowing it to fire on the move theoretically. Inside, the best crew from the Kantemirovskaya Guards tank division is strapped in. On the other end, captured and repainted with red stars, is the M48 pattern. The test is simple. Target acquisition. A pop-up target appears at a random azimuth, distance 1,800 meters. Both crews must spot, lay the gun, and fire. The target pops up. Inside the T-55 tank, chaos ensues. The commander screams the bearing. The gunner grabs the heavy manual traverse wheels. He cranks them, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing cold. The electric traverse whine is high-pitched and jerky. The turret lurches. He peers through his TS-2B telescopic sight. The field of view is narrow, like looking through a drinking straw. He has to hunt for the target. Where is it? To the left? A little more. Now he has to estimate the range. Is it 1,700 meters? 1,800? He aligns the stadiometric markings, the little lines in the scope, against the target's height. He does the mental math. He shouts, "Fire!" Total elapsed time, 19 seconds. The shell lands short, kicking up a plume of snow. Now, the M48 pattern. The target pops up. The American machine reacts with a terrifying fluidity. The turret doesn't jerk, it glides. The sound isn't a mechanical scream, it's a low hydraulic hum. Inside the pattern, there is no frantic cranking. The commander spots the target through his wide-angle periscope. He doesn't scream coordinates. He simply engages his override control. With the palm of his hand, he slews the turret directly to where he is looking. The gunner doesn't have to hunt. The gun is brought to the target for him. Then comes the twist that the watching generals couldn't see from the bunker, the detail that changed everything. The gunner looks through the M17B1C rangefinder. He sees a split image of the target. He turns a small knob. The images slide together until they merge into one sharp picture. Click. That click was the sound of the Soviet Union losing the tech war. When the gunner merged those images, he wasn't just focusing a lens, he was inputting data into a device the Soviets had drastically underestimated, the M13 A1 ballistic computer. It wasn't a digital computer with microchips. It was a mechanical brain, a complex box of gears, cams, and shafts hidden deep in the turret. When the rangefinder obtained the distance, it automatically told the computer. The computer then physically rotated the gun barrel to the exact elevation needed. It calculated the drop of the shell. It did the math. The gunner didn't guess. He didn't estimate. He just pulled the trigger. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. The 90mm shell slammed directly into the center of the target. In the bunker, the silence was heavy. The M48 pattern was nearly twice as fast on the draw. In a tank duel, 19 seconds versus 11 seconds is not a margin of error. It is a death sentence. The Soviet engineers were baffled. They had mocked the M48 for being the Cadillac luxurious, soft, overly complex, but they had forgotten what a Cadillac actually was. It was a machine where the driver was isolated from the road. The M48 pattern was designed with power steering for the gun. The controls were developed by Cadillac Gauge. They were sensitive, precise, and effortless. The T-55 tank was a tractor. It was rugged, reliable, and brutal. But it forced the crew to fight the machine before they could fight the enemy. The gunner arrived at the trigger, exhausted. The M48 gunner arrived at the trigger fresh. But the true horror for the Soviet advisors lay in the hull-down realization. They had designed the T-54 divided by 55 to be low, to hide in the open steppes of Europe. But in the proxy wars of the Middle East and Asia, the terrain was rugged. The M48 pattern, with its tall silhouette, had a distinct advantage. It could sit behind a ridge, with only its turret eyes and gun exposed to a position called hull down. Because the M48's gun could depress point down to -9 degrees, it could peek over a hill, shoot, and back up. The T-54 tank? Its low roof meant the gun breech hit the ceiling if they tried to aim down. It could only depress 4 degrees. To shoot at an enemy below them, the Soviet tank had to drive completely over the crest of the hill, exposing its belly and tracks. The advantage of the low profile was actually a trap. It blinded them. It limited their gun movement. It turned their tanks into metal coffins the moment the terrain wasn't perfectly flat. The twist was psychological as much as mechanical. The Soviets had built a tank for a specific type of war, a massive rushing horde across flat plains. The Americans had built a tank for combat, a flexible, responsive system designed to hunt. As the test ended, the lead Soviet engineer wrote a note in his logbook that would never be published in Pravda. "We have prioritized armor over awareness. We have built a shield, but the Americans have built a sword." But there was one final piece of the puzzle. The rangefinder and the hydraulic controls explained the accuracy and speed, but they didn't explain the lethality. The captured M48s were firing a specific type of ammunition that seemed to ignore the sloped armor of the T-54. The Soviets assumed the 90mm gun was too small to penetrate their frontal armor. They were wrong. The Americans were hiding a secret inside the shell casing itself, a metallurgical breakthrough that the KGB had completely missed. The shock was not just that the tank was better. It was that the Americans had fundamentally rewritten the physics of armor penetration, and the Soviets were about to find out the hard way that their steel was obsolete. Kubinka Proving Grounds. The sun was setting over the testing range, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. The Soviet Commission had seen the M48 pattern move with impossible grace. They had seen it acquire targets with supernatural speed. But one question remained the most critical question of all. Could it actually kill? The T-54 and T-55 tanks were built around a single religious belief: the Holy Glacis. The frontal armor of a T-54 tank consists of a 100mm steel plate sloped back at a steep 60 degrees. In the world of ballistics, slope is a force multiplier. That 60-degree angle means that an incoming shell doesn't just travel through 100mm of steel, it has to travel through nearly 200mm of metal to penetrate. Furthermore, the slope is designed to deflect kinetic energy rounds, causing them to skid harmlessly off the hull like a stone skipping on a pond. Soviet intelligence was certain. The M48 pattern's 90mm gun was too weak. It fired a projectile that was lighter and slower than the Soviet 100mm shell. According to the physics charts on the walls of the Kremlin, an American 90mm shell should bounce off a T-54 tank 99 times out of 100. The engineers prepared the final test. They placed a T-54 hull downrange. They loaded the captured M48 pattern with a specific round found in the ammunition racks of the Israeli tanks. It wasn't the standard pointed armor-piercing shot. It was a blunt-nosed shell with a strange finned tail assembly. The designation stenciled on the side was M431 Heat. The Soviet ballistic expert adjusted his glasses. He knew what Heat, high-explosive anti-tank, was. It was technology used in bazookas and infantry weapons. It was considered unreliable, erratic, and useless against heavy, sloped armor because the fuse often failed to trigger on glancing hits. He expected the American shell to strike the sloped glacis and deflect upward, exploding harmlessly in the air. The order was given. The M48 fired. The sound was different, a sharp crack rather than a boom. The tracer burned red as it streaked downrange. It struck the T-54 tank on the upper glacis plate. There was no deflection, there was no skip, there was a flash of blinding white light, a localized supernova against the dark green steel. Then, silence. The advisors drove out to the target hull. As they approached, the expert felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The shell hadn't bounced. Burnt into the sloped armor was a small, neat hole no wider than a coin. It looked insignificant. It looked like a blemish, but around the edges of the hole the steel had flowed like liquid wax. They opened the driver's hatch of the T-54 tank and looked inside. The interior was a charnel house of mechanical destruction. The transmission block, a massive chunk of cast iron located at the rear of the compartment, was shattered. The ammunition rack was perforated. The dummy crew mannequins were shredded. The Soviet advisors were staring at the Monroe effect, perfected. The M431 shell didn't rely on speed or weight. It relied on chemistry. Inside the nose of the shell was a cone of copper liner backed by high explosives. When the probe at the tip of the shell touched the tank, it detonated the explosives instantly. This explosion collapsed the copper cone inward, turning the metal into a hypervelocity jet of superplastic particles moving at Mach 25. This jet didn't penetrate the armor in the traditional sense. It eroded it. It punched through the steel like a high-pressure water cutter going through cardboard. And here was the true shock, the reveal that made the advisor's blood run cold. The jet of molten copper moved so fast that the 60-degree angle of the T-54's armor was irrelevant. The jet bit into the steel before it could deflect. The Soviet Union had compromised the entire design of their tank, making it cramped, uncomfortable, and blind, just to achieve that sloped armor protection. And the Americans had negated 50 years of Soviet metallurgical science with a single, clever artillery shell. The T-54 tank was not invincible. It was a metal coffin wrapped in a false sense of security. But the investigation didn't end on the firing range. The final nail in the coffin came from the logistics reports streaming in from the proxy wars in Vietnam and the Middle East. While the technical advisors were obsessing over gun calibers, the strategists were looking at a different set of numbers. Mean time between failures, MTBF. In the humid jungles of Vietnam and the scorching deserts of the Sinai, the T-54 and T-55 tanks were failing. Their diesel engines, while robust on paper, were vibrating themselves to death. The transmissions were crude, requiring a sledgehammer to shift gears, which led to driver fatigue and mechanical stripped gears. The tracks were made of dead steel pins that wore out after a few hundred kilometers of hard marching. The M48 Patton, however, was thriving in the chaos. The shock here was a philosophical one. The Soviets believed a tank should be like a tractor, cheap, disposable, and easy to fix with a wrench. The Americans believed a tank should be like an aircraft, a complex system that required maintenance but delivered peak performance. In the field, this meant the M48 Patton kept fighting when the T-54 tanks stopped. The M48's air-cooled AV-1790 engine was thirsty, yes, but it was modular. If an engine blew, American recovery vehicles could lift the entire rear deck and swap the power pack in 4 hours. To change the engine on a T-54 tank required a crane, a workshop, and nearly 2 days of labor. In the middle of a blitzkrieg, a T-54 with a blown gasket was not a tank, it was a bunker. The Soviet advisors read reports of M48 columns in Vietnam, driving through minefields, taking hits that blew off road wheels, and keeping moving. The suspension of the Patton was over-engineered. It had shock absorbers. It had torsion bars that could take a beating. The T-54 tank rattled the teeth out of its crew, leading to exhaustion. A tired crew makes mistakes. A tired crew misses targets. A tired crew dies.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.